When my mom remarried, I was hopeful but cautious. After years of just the two of us, it felt strange to imagine someone else stepping into the role of a father figure, even if I didn't need one anymore. I wanted her to be happy, though, so I did my best to be supportive. Her new husband, Mark, seemed like a decent guy, kind, polite, and respectful. He wasn't overly involved in my life, but I didn't mind. I wasn't looking for another dad, just someone who would treat my mom well. The bigger surprise came when I met Dylan, Mark's son from his first marriage. He was in his early 20s, a few years older than me, and carried himself with a quiet confidence. At first, I wasn't sure what to make of him. He seemed reserved, almost shy, but there was an ease about him that made it hard not to like him. When he moved in with us a few weeks after the wedding, I wondered how things would change. To my surprise, Dylan and I got along quickly. We bonded over simple things, binge-watching shows, arguing about which takeout place was the best, and sharing an unspoken understanding about how strange it was to suddenly be part of a blended family. He didn't feel like a stepbrother, though. It was more like having a roommate I didn't get to choose but happened to like anyway. Mom seemed genuinely happy. For the first time in years, she wasn't carrying the weight of everything alone. Mark was supportive, affectionate, and attentive, and I could see the glow in her face when she was around him. It was reassuring, even comforting, to see her like that. I felt like we were finally settling into something stable, something normal. But as the weeks went on, I started noticing things that didn't quite sit right. They were small at first, almost imperceptible. Mom and Dylan seemed to have an easy rapport, one that went beyond the usual stepson and stepmother dynamic. I chalked it up to their personalities. Mom was warm and nurturing, the kind of person who made everyone feel at ease. Dylan was naturally charismatic, even when he was trying not to be. It made sense that they'd get along. Then there were moments that made me pause. Once I walked into the kitchen and found them laughing about something. They stopped abruptly when they saw me, exchanging a quick glance before changing the subject. I brushed it off, telling myself I was reading too much into it. After all, they were still getting used to living under the same roof. But the feeling lingered. I started noticing more how Dylan seemed to gravitate toward her when she was around, how their conversations sometimes carried a tone I couldn't quite place. I tried to push the doubts out of my mind. After everything we'd been through, I didn't want to question my mom or Dylan. I wanted to believe our new family was everything it appeared to be: happy, healthy, and whole. Looking back, I see now that those little moments were cracks in the foundation. I just didn't realize how deep they went. It was an ordinary evening when everything began to feel off. I had just gotten home from work, exhausted and ready to collapse onto the couch for the night. The house was quiet, except for the faint sound of the shower running upstairs. Mom's voice carried down the hallway as she sang, something she always did when she thought no one was listening. It was one of those little quirks that made the house feel alive. I dropped my bag by the door and headed to the kitchen, grabbing a glass of water before making my way upstairs. The sound of the shower stopped as I reached the top step, and I figured Mom was done for the night. Dylan's door was closed, and his music played softly in the background. Everything seemed normal. As I walked toward my room, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. Mom had just stepped out of the bathroom, wrapped in a towel. She was heading to her bedroom, her hair still dripping wet. But what happened next made my stomach drop. Her towel slipped. For a split second, it felt like the air was sucked out of the hallway. I froze, unsure of what to do. Mom gasped, quickly grabbing the towel and wrapping it around herself again. It was an awkward moment, but one that could have been easily brushed off as nothing more than an embarrassing accident. Except Dylan was standing in the hallway too. I hadn't noticed him at first, but there he was, leaning casually against the wall, his phone in his hand. He wasn't looking at his screen, though. His eyes were on her. And it wasn't the look of someone startled or caught off guard. It was different. Mom laughed nervously, brushing it off as if it were no big deal. "Well, that's embarrassing," she said, tightening the towel around her. Dylan chuckled too, but his laugh didn't seem quite right. It wasn't awkward or uncomfortable, it was almost knowing. I wanted to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping over me. Accidents happen, I told myself. There was nothing wrong with what I'd just seen. But the way Dylan looked at her stuck in my mind. It lingered, making me question everything. For the rest of the evening, I couldn't stop replaying the moment in my head. I told myself I was overthinking it. Mom was probably mortified, and Dylan was just trying to diffuse the awkwardness with a laugh. But the image of his expression wouldn't leave me. As the night went on, I started noticing other things. How Dylan lingered in the living room longer than usual, glancing toward the hallway whenever Mom passed by. How Mom avoided making eye contact with me, instead focusing on tidying up things that didn't need tidying. There was an unspoken tension in the air, and it made me feel uneasy in my own home. I couldn't sleep that night. My mind raced with questions I didn't want to ask. Was I imagining things? Was I letting one small incident spiral into something bigger? Or was there something more to what I'd seen? I hated the doubts creeping in, but I couldn't ignore them. Something about that moment felt wrong, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was just the beginning. The doubt gnawed at me, refusing to let go. No matter how hard I tried to rationalize everything, the image of Dylan's expression when Mom's towel slip stayed lodged in my mind. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe I was just imagining things because I'd been under a lot of stress lately. But as the days passed, I started noticing more small, subtle interactions that only fueled my unease. Dylan had always been charming, but now his charm seemed more directed. He gravitated toward Mom in ways I hadn't paid attention to before. He'd linger in the kitchen while she cooked, asking her questions about her day, cracking jokes to make her laugh. It wasn't just polite small talk, it felt intentional. She responded warmly, too warmly, like she was basking in the attention. I tried to brush it off. They were just getting along, weren't they? It was good that they were forming a bond, right? That's what I kept telling myself. But then there were moments that didn't feel like bonding. One evening, I came home earlier than usual. I opened the door quietly, not expecting anyone to hear me. As I walked through the house, I heard voices coming from the kitchen. Mom and Dylan. Their laughter echoed down the hallway, light and playful. But something about it didn't feel right. I stopped just short of the doorway, standing out of sight, and listened. I couldn't make out every word, but the tone of their conversation sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't about the words themselves, it was the way they spoke, the way they seemed so comfortable, so in sync. It felt too intimate, too familiar. When I finally stepped into the room, they both stopped abruptly. Mom glanced at me with a nervous smile, while Dylan looked down at his phone, suddenly disinterested. "Oh, you're home early," Mom said, her voice a little too casual. "Yeah," I replied, trying to act normal. But the way they exchanged a quick glance when they thought I wasn't looking made my stomach churn. That night I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers, or at least some sort of clarity. I hated invading someone's privacy, but the doubt was eating me alive. When Dylan left his phone on the coffee table and stepped outside to take a call, I saw my opportunity. My hands shook as I picked it up, scrolling through his messages. Most of them were harmless conversations with friends, memes, the usual stuff. But then I found the thread with Mom. My heart pounded as I read through it. The messages weren't explicitly inappropriate, but they were far too personal. Inside jokes, playful teasing, compliments that felt out of place. And then there was one that made my blood run cold. "No one will find out. We're safe." Safe from what? My hands were trembling as I put the phone back, my mind racing with possibilities. I didn't want to believe it, but the pieces were starting to fall into place. And the picture they painted was one I never wanted to see. Confronting them was not something I planned out. It wasn't a moment I rehearsed or a decision I took lightly. But the weight of what I had discovered was too heavy to carry alone. I had spent days, maybe weeks, trapped in my own mind, replaying every interaction, every glance, and every word exchanged between Mom and Dylan. The message I had read on his phone haunted me. "No one will find out. We're safe." Safe from what? I couldn't stop asking myself that question. What were they hiding, and why did it feel like the answer was something I could never unhear? One evening, the tension in the house was unbearable. I could barely look at either of them without feeling like I was suffocating under the weight of my suspicions. They acted as if everything was normal, like we were just an ordinary family going about our lives. But I couldn't keep pretending. Every time they exchanged a look or shared a laugh, my stomach churned with anger, confusion, and betrayal. I decided enough was enough. If I didn't confront them, I knew the doubt would destroy me. So I waited for a moment when we were all together. Mom was in the living room scrolling through her tablet while Dylan was lounging on the couch, his eyes glued to the TV. I stood in the doorway, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure they could hear it. "I need to talk to you," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. They both looked up, surprised by my tone. Mom put her tablet down, her brows furrowing in concern. "What's wrong?" she asked. I took a deep breath, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "I know something's going on between you two," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "I've seen the way you act around each other. I read the messages on Dylan's phone." For a moment, the room was silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the television in the background. Mom's face went pale, and Dylan shifted uncomfortably on the couch, his jaw tightening. "I don't know what you're talking about," Mom said, her voice trembling. "Don't lie to me," I snapped, the anger bubbling up to the surface. "I saw the messages. I saw the way he looks at you, the way you act around him. Just tell me the truth." Dylan finally spoke, his voice defensive. "This is ridiculous. You're making something out of nothing." But the guilt was written all over their faces. Mom couldn't meet my eyes, and Dylan looked like he wanted to be anywhere but in that room. "Stop lying," I said, my voice rising. "I deserve to know the truth. Are you two having an affair?" Mom broke first, her eyes filled with tears, and she buried her face in her hands. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I felt the air leave my lungs as her words confirmed what I had feared all along. Dylan sat there in silence, his face unreadable. "How could you do this?" I asked, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and heartbreak. "How could you betray me like this? How could you betray Mark?" Neither of them had an answer. The truth hung heavy in the air, suffocating and inescapable. I had confronted them for the truth, but hearing it didn't bring any relief. It only shattered whatever was left of the family I thought we had. The days after the confrontation were a blur of emotions: anger, sadness, disbelief, and betrayal, all swirling together into something I could barely process. I couldn't stay in the same house with them, not after what I had uncovered. I packed a bag that night and left without a plan, driving aimlessly until I ended up at a friend's place. When they opened the door and saw my face, they didn't ask questions. They just let me in, and for that, I was grateful. Mom called me the next morning. I let it go to voicemail. She called again. And again. Her texts started pouring in, apologies and explanations that I didn't have the energy or desire to read. I couldn't bear to hear her voice or see her name pop up on my screen. The pain of her betrayal was too fresh, too raw. Dylan didn't reach out at all. Not that I expected him to. His silence felt like an admission of guilt, as if he knew there was nothing he could say to make this right. It didn't matter, though. I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to forgive him. I couldn't stay at my friend's place forever, and after a few days I knew I had to go back home. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed answers. I needed closure. When I walked through the front door, the house felt eerily quiet. Mom was sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale and tired. She looked up when she saw me, her eyes red and puffy from crying. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice cracking. "I never meant for this to happen." I didn't respond. I didn't trust myself to speak without breaking down. Instead, I sat across from her, staring at the woman who had always been my rock, my protector, the person I trusted most in the world. She tried to explain herself, but her words only made it worse. She said it started as an innocent connection, that she and Dylan just understood each other in a way no one else did. She claimed it was never meant to go as far as it did, that it was a mistake. But her excuses didn't matter. A mistake is something you trip over, not something you actively choose to do over and over again. Mark found out shortly after. Mom told him everything before I could, and the fallout was as messy as you'd expect. He packed his things and left, refusing to look at her or Dylan. The house felt like a war zone, every room carrying the weight of broken trust and shattered relationships. Dylan moved out soon after, which was a small relief, but the damage had already been done. My relationship with Mom was beyond repair. Every time I looked at her, I saw the betrayal. I saw the betrayal. I saw her choosing someone else, someone she had no business being with, over the family we had built together. Eventually, I decided to move out too. I needed space to heal, to rebuild my life without the constant reminder of what had happened. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Looking back, the whole experience taught me a painful lesson about trust. I learned that even the people closest to you, the ones you think would never hurt you, are capable of the worst kinds of betrayal. It's a lesson I never wanted to learn, but it's one I'll never forget. In the end, I chose to walk away, not just from the people who hurt me, but from the bitterness and anger that threatened to consume me. It's not an easy path, but it's the only one that leads to peace.